As we pay close attention this morning to what happened Sunday in Ethiopia, the crash that killed 18 Canadians, today we remember another aviation disaster 10 years ago today, in which 17 Canadians lost their lives. It's the anniversary of the crash of the Cougar helicopter off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland. The families of the victims today say much more still has to be done to improve safety. Here's where it all began, with Cougar Flight 491 crashing into the icy North Atlantic about 55 kilometers southeast of St. John's. A routine flight out to those offshore oil production platforms. 2 pilots and 15 passengers died. There was one survivor, Robert Decker. An inquiry led to a number of recommendations to improve safety, but some of those still have not been implemented 10 years on. Why don't we pick up this conversation with Peter Cowan, who is in St. John's, live for us this morning at a very special place in all of this story, who's been talking to some of the family members about those they lost 10 years on. Peter, good morning to you. We remember this story so keenly. Tell us about where things are 10 years later.
Heather, as you said, one of the key issues is safety for the offshore, because even this morning, just a couple minutes ago, a helicopter flew over here carrying workers out to the offshore oil rigs. Every day, those helicopters are flying back and forth. And that's why the families say it's really important that all of the recommendations that came from the various investigations actually get implemented. For example, there was a public inquiry here in Newfoundland and Labrador that looked at the issue of safety, and one of the key recommendations still hasn't been acted upon. Danny Breen is the mayor here in St. John's, but he also has a very personal connection with this. He lost his brother Peter in that crash, and he says here's one of the key recommendations that he'd like to see actually implemented.
I still believe that the recommendation of establishing a separate safety regulatory authority is important. And I also think that we need to have 24/7 common response times, including fixed-wing aircraft across the province.
That was from the inquiry, but it's also worth noting, Heather, that 2 out of the 4 recommendations from the Transportation Safety Board around the actual safety of the way these aircraft are certified, those haven't been implemented either.
Peter, I was remembering back. We did the show. We came to St. John's to do the show after this happened. It had a profound impact across the country, not just in the community. So the 17 who lost their lives, how are they being remembered now?
There are various ways that people remember. This monument is one of the examples. This was put up in order to remember the victims of both this and another offshore helicopter crash. And in fact, their names are etched here into the memorial as a way to remember. And already this morning, someone's actually left some roses down here underneath as a way to remember. For other family members, the place they like to remember is up at the airport. They leave notes and flowers at the gate at that very last spot where their loved ones took off before they headed on their ill-fated flight. And the other key moment will be this evening. Every year they hold a memorial service. This year they're holding it in one of the biggest churches they could find in order to give an opportunity for everyone who wants to come together, remember their loved ones, and try and move forward 10 years after this disaster. Because, you know, even for some of the family members that I was talking to, that helicopter flying overhead, it's a constant reminder of the loss from their family, and also the danger that the workers in the offshore face, the risk that they take in order to ensure that Newfoundland and Labrador can have an offshore oil and gas sector.
Something that I remember so vividly from that, I talk about the story often in speeches because it had a big impact on me 10 years ago. And I remember somebody at the airport there explaining, 17 died, but 1 young man lived. And somebody at the airport there, Peter, told me, God threw him back. Someone had to tell the story of what happened. And I've never forgot that description of Robert Decker, the lone survivor. 17 lives lost, and you're remembering them today. Thank you very much for doing so, Peter. I appreciate it. Peter Cowan in St. John's.